Hello and welcome to another Science 9 crash course. In today's episode, we're going to continue talking about our genetics and focus specifically on DNA. DNA is actually just an acronym. It stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. Our DNA holds our genetic information, and it is found inside the nucleus of every single cell in our body. DNA is an amazing molecule, and it is able to reproduce itself inside the cell. This molecule is also able to move itself from the parent to the offspring. And most importantly, it controls all the structures and functions of the cell. To help organize our DNA, our cells package it up in structures called chromosomes. In humans, we have 23 pairs of chromosomes for a grand total of 46 total chromosomes. Back in 1953, the structure of DNA was discovered by a couple of young scientists named James Watson and Francis Crick. They discovered that DNA is double-stranded and is in the shape of a coiled ladder. This is called a double helix. They also discovered that the rungs of the ladder were made up of nitrogenous bases, adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine, or simply ATCG. The coiled part of the ladder is made up of sugars and phosphates and is called the sugar-phosphate backbone. In DNA, the nitrogenous bases have very specific pairing rules. A always pairs with T, and C always pairs with G. The human genome contains approximately 3 billion of these base pairs. So how is it possible for this molecule called DNA to give us all the traits and characteristics that we have? All of these base pairs are essentially a code, and a section of DNA that codes for a protein is called a gene. These proteins then work together to give us all the traits and abilities and characteristics that we have. Because this molecule controls all the structures and functions of a cell, of course researchers and scientists want to figure out how this all works and how they can modify this to help humans. They have been able to successfully modify the genetics of different species. This is called biotechnology. Biotechnology can take many forms, but essentially it is just manipulating living things to benefit humans. This is actually a good thing. One of the first biotechnologies was to move the human gene for insulin into bacteria. We are now able to mass produce insulin for all diabetics throughout the world. Scientists can now move pretty much any gene from a human into another organism. Moving pieces of DNA from one cell to another is called genetic engineering. And when you move a gene from one species to another, you create what's called a transgenic organism. This allows us to move desirable characteristics from one species to another, like glowing in the dark. Earlier in this episode, we mentioned that DNA is able to replicate itself. The same thing happens with the cells of our body. Eventually, all cells will die and need to be replaced by other new cells. The human body is made up of approximately 70 trillion cells, and normal body cells are what we call somatic cells. To replace a dead cell, the surrounding cells must undergo the process of mitosis. Firstly, the cell replicates all of its DNA and then undergoes mitosis and divides everything equally to produce two identical daughter cells. Somatic cells are not the only type of cell that we have. We also have sex cells, which we call gametes. The gametes are simply the egg and the sperm, and are different than normal body cells because they only have half the genetic information. In order to reproduce sexually, organisms must produce these gametes by a process called meiosis. Meiosis is a similar process to mitosis, with a few notable exceptions. The first major difference is that there are 2 cell divisions instead of 1. And the second biggest difference is that there are 4 daughter cells instead of 2, and each daughter cell only has half the genetic information. Only having half the DNA or chromosomes is essential, so that when the gametes meet, they will have a complete full set. This fertilized egg is now what we call a zygote, and will go on to produce a brand new organism. I hope you have learned a lot today about what goes on in the cells of your body. Thanks for listening.